Hello everybody and welcome to week 3 of game development. Today we'll be mainly focusing on nav agents and a manager. So this entire time we've been building up nav agents, getting them working with a state machine, and we're putting them now together with a manager to actually be able to select different agents and issue them individual commands. So what this document and this experiment is intended to do, you'll be creating a duplicate agent and actually a manager alongside to track which agent is currently selected, which one you'd be issuing a command to, things like that. And then you'll be moving the input, which is currently on our just the agent itself. If it detects space has been pressed, it's going to pause. We're going to change that so it's going to go just to the single agent that our nav manager has, or our agent manager. An additional thing it'll have you do is add some in-game feedback to see which one you currently have selected. You'll first get it working by just pushing a number out to the console and saying which index it currently has selected, but you want to give players some feedback in-game of very clearly which one you currently have selected. So towards the very end, it'll have you take a screenshot with multiple agents in the scene, showing that one is actually paused and selected. The yellow ring indication, and well, that's really tiny on the screen, sorry. The yellow ring indicates that you currently have that one selected. The gray ring just indicates it's not currently selected. So you'll be selecting one by pressing the right button and it'll issue commands directly to that one. And then it'll have you press space, showing that you can only pause, or you can have the ability to pause one at a time. Now this screenshot is just showing the bare minimum of what is needed for 100%. I would recommend trying to put down at least 3 agents in the scene. That's usually a little bit better when you're doing error checking to see if you keep pressing right, will it actually cycle back to the beginning and things like that, versus just 2 agents in the scene where it would just flip-flop between the 2. So today, let's actually dig in to see how we could set this up. I'm going to go in a similar way that this document is going to have you set things up. We're going to change a couple of things, but I'll make sure to mention those at each time that we're changing something. So for this, there is another Unity package available for you. So we'll download that and we'll import this into an empty Unity project to get started. So this one is slightly different than the other ones that you've been working with. We'll just go ahead and create a new project here. And we'll call this GDV Agent Manager. And we'll put 2011 on here. Go ahead and create this. While Unity's working there, I'm going to just show this downloaded package in the folder. I'm going to extract it real quick so we can then drag and drop it, the actual Unity package, into Unity once it's all up and loaded. Any second now, Unity. There you go. So typical time's about 45 seconds on this computer. That's good to know. All right. So we have just an empty scene here. I'm going to switch over to the assets view and drag and drop that package. We see this is a bit cleaned up from the previous package we got. It does still have the state machine in here, as well as the only one that it has is the nav agent state machine best. So it's a little bit more compressed. It doesn't have all those other incremental steps as we were converting the agent from using 2 different scripts into the one script and things like that. It just has that fresh state machine best version to work from. In addition, if you did struggle with the last assignment, and I want to go in nav agents, there's a scenes folder and nav mesh. The last assignment had you implement a pause. This one does come with that pause implemented for you. So if I press space, it will pause any active agents that I have in the scene. So what I mean by that is, let's go ahead and just create a duplicate of this. Control D for this engine. We'll just pop one over there. If we press play and try and issue that space command, we see all those agents are doing that input check. So all of them will react to that space button being pressed immediately. Whereas we want to try and influence just one agent at a time. That's where this manager really comes in. So got 2 agents in the scene. That'll be enough to work from for now. Now, as far as a manager type object, if you remember from very first lecture we did, I generally like to have a specific object to attach things to, so I'll just create an empty object for our manager. I don't really care where it is in the scene. I just like having it separate as like a manager type object. So I'll go ahead and call this agent manager. And we now need to create a script for it. So I'll put my script into the other scripts folder here. Create a new C# script. We'll just call it agent manager, same name we used before. And load up some Visual Studio. All right. We've got our agent manager script shell to actually write out what we want it to do, what we want it to hold, and things like that. One of the very first things we're going to need is a reference to those agents in the scene. We need to have them in some sort of list or container or collection or something like that. For the purpose of this, let's check out a couple of different ways we could do it. We could create an array of game objects. Game object array, just call it, we'll go with nav agents. Initialize it to null, and just so we can set it in the editor, I will make it serialized. So we'll serialize that field. So we have an array of game objects now. If we hop over to Unity, I'm going to attach the agent manager script to our agent manager object, select it, and have the inspector showing. We now could change this and put in our different agents. Because I said it was the game type, or the type of thing it's storing is just a basic game object, when I go to actually select it from the scene, it would allow me to even say like, oh yeah, my camera is the first agent in our agents list and things like that. So as an extra layer of protection and just simplicity, I'm going to change it. Rather than looking for an entire array of game objects, I just want it to be the actual agent scripts, or agent, the nav agent state machine underscore best is the actual script we're using for our agent. That's a really long name. That's going to be annoying to type in different places where we'll need to use it. So very first thing I'm going to do is rename this script. I hate the fact that it's got such a huge name. Let's simplify this down. This will just be called our agent. Now, since I just overwrote that right here, if I try and compile now, we're going to get some errors anywhere that was being referenced elsewhere in the code. So in order to change this a a little bit better, I'm going to Control Z to go back to where I was before I did the rename. We're going to use the editor to our advantage. I'm going to right click and actually select the rename function. Rename allows you to actually rename all instances in this file that are related to that object that you currently have. So just by going agent here, now with the rename option open, it's going to rename it 3 times in this one file. Apply that. Now Control Shift B to build. We're not getting any errors or anything, just some warnings and messages like, hey, these are empty, they're not doing anything. All right, that's a good point. Nav point doesn't need any functionality. And Agent Manager will do some stuff, but for now, since they're empty, I just want to have clean compile. And Nav Agents is never assigned to, so we're never actually using it in code. It's saying it's irrelevant, but we will be in a moment. Now that I've got my state machine script renamed to simply agent, we can now change this from holding an array of game objects themselves to holding that agent component directly. So we'll save this, hop back over to Unity, and now when we go to select agents, only the agents in our scene will show up as a possible selection. So that's the first big change that we'll do. We're holding an array of the actual agent components instead of any game object in the scene. And let's go ahead and select both of them. If we play, we haven't really done any code affecting any updates or anything, or even being able to select the different agents. So that shouldn't make any difference. We're just looking at how we can set up a container to get a reference to the agents themselves. Our next part will actually be selecting those agents and issuing them the command. So before we actually set up the inputs and tracking which index we're currently at, I'm going to go to the agent and find out where we were doing the command for the space press. That's down here in our update. We've overridden update to detect that space was pressed to pause it. I'm going to actually comment this out so that our agent itself is no longer doing any input code. That's all commented out and won't run. So just to check, I'm going to try and play again and make sure that space is disabled. All right. Space isn't working anymore. So we've got to set up a couple of different things. Let's go to our agent manager and let's get a variable for tracking which one of our agents we have selected. So typically when you're working with an array, you have an integer to index into it. You can't really use a float because you can't go halfway in between an index in an array. So integers work great since they're always whole numbers. We'll create an integer and we'll call it our cur index or current selected index, whatever you would like. I'll just go cur index. When we first start the game, what do we want to have happen? Well, when we want to start the game, we'll say that none of them are selected by default until we press right once. So we'll say our current index is -1, a totally outside the bounds of an array, just saying we don't have any selected. Our next step is getting the actual selection working. That'll be an update where we will check for an input key press. We'll be looking for if they press the key right arrow. So get key down, key code, right arrow. That'll select the next one in the array. So since we're currently tracking an index, we can say we'll change this index, change the index by 1 in the positive direction. That'll be cur index plus plus. Adds 1 to its current value, and then technically we're going to be using that index to say that that one is selected. So we press that, should be all good. One thing we'll do is we'll also add a print or debug.log just to signify we currently have, and we'll output our index, cur index, and I forgot a plus. Selected, that is, and we'll just get the name from our actual agent itself. We'll ask our nav agents array for whatever it has in the current index element. And from there, we can call any functions we want. All game objects have a name associated with it. So we'll just get the name from it and print that out. So we save this. And we'll hop back to Unity. Give this a quick play. We see everything's gray and all that, or everything's just going along like normal. I'm going to pop open my console to watch this. Now, right now, we have all these patrol states, idle states, switching, all of that's kind of cluttering up on my screen. I can turn on collapse to collapse it down a little bit. But if I want to filter this and be able to look for my specific stuff, probably the agent manager stuff, I would look for agent manager here. And if we press the right arrow, oh, agent manager did not like, doesn't like this filtering, but I did just press right arrow and it was printing, didn't print the name. So currently have 0 selected, that is nav agent. That is nav agent without any number. If we press right again, currently have 1 selected, that's nav agent with a 1. We press right again, index out of range. Index was outside the range of the, or the bounds of the array. Well, right here, we're using that index to go into this array based on which index number this is and find the element with that. We're trying to get the name of that. This is where that null access is happening because, or index out of range, is because our index was literally outside how many number of nav agents we had. So we can change this up right now and fix that to prevent that from happening. So after we've done the change is when we'd want to make sure that that value is still within inside the bounds of our array. So we'll do a quick check. If cur index is ever greater than or equal to the length of our array, and this should look similar to how we set up our nav points. Whenever we hit one of those, we're just saying go to the next one. But if it goes past the end, we're going to reset that back to the beginning so we can have it loop around and continuously index, continuously select new agents. So adding this, error check the upper bounds of the array. So we'll save that again. Give this a play. And give this a play one more time. when it's not compiling. There we go. So selected the new one. It is nav agent. Next one, nav agent 1. Next one again will be our nav agent once again, and so on. As I mentioned, I was getting off on, or going off a little bit of a topic where I was saying how all these different state messages are kind of interfering with us tracking down exactly what's going on with our new stuff. One thing I want to point out is inside our the state machine itself, inside the state, up here there is this pound defined saying that we want the state machine to be verbose in its comments. We've created this simple macro so you can just comment that out, and then the majority of print statements or debug statements that you had will get prevented if it's nothing that you need to worry about. The exception ones will still be thrown even if you have that commented out. So we'll save that, and we now should have made our state machine a bit quieter. So state machine no longer going to print just the basic state changes. We can turn that on at will, and I do recommend having it on for when you're taking the screenshot and stuff, so you do see it enter the pause state, things like that. But right now, I just press right once, currently selected 0, currently selected 1, and we just got a 2 counter for that selected 0 again. And we can keep cycling through. We're already on 17 cycles all the way around. So we've got a way to switch between these. But when I'm sitting here and playing the game, without knowing that this is 0, or the one without a number, and this one is the one with a 1, it'd be really hard to tell which one I have selected from just staring at the game. So let's change this and add a little bit of feedback on which one I have selected. Or actually, let's get it calling the pause function first, I guess. So we'll get the pause functionality working first. That'll be outside of our right arrow input check. We'll just add another input check, still inside update, because we need to check every frame if this key is pressed. We'll be looking for input, get key down, key code, and we'll just reuse the space key again, since that's what it was originally. We saw up here on line 29 is where we're saying which one we have selected, and we're even getting the name of our current agent that we have selected right here. So anytime I want to reference which one we have currently selected, it's nav agent sub cur index. So we'll say nav agents sub cur index. And looking off of what we can do, there is the pause function right here. And this pause function is the one that you would have created for the last experiment, but it is written for you just in case you had some troubles with it. We can even go to that real quick just to show you what it is. So it's basically all that code just completed from the previous assignment. So by pressing space, we should pause our currently selected nav agent. And if we play, and I press pause immediately or space immediately, oh, hey, that looks familiar. Index outside the bounds of the array. Well, when we start this game, current index is -1 because we don't have any selected when we first start. So one thing we can do is add a little bit of a protection to these action keys, just like we did up here where we're protecting it, trying to select which one. We'll be checking if our current index, if it does have one selected. So if it's ever greater than -1 and it's less than the end of the array, and sorry, each comparison needs a full statement. Current index is less than the end of the array, which is our navagents.length. So less than navagents.length. This adds protection. Only run if we have a valid index. All right. So next up, I guess let's make sure our space is working now. So press play. Bunch of errors from when it was recompiling mid-run. But we're clean again. If I press space now with nothing selected, nothing happens. If I press right once, we've now got 0 selected. That should be this guy out front. I press space. It pauses the one I have selected. Press right again. Well, got that other one selected. I press space. We can pause that one as well. We can unpause the one we currently have selected, switch back over, unpause that one. So we've now got that communication working where our agent manager is the only one doing input. Our agents are now responding just to if they're selected or not, then they'll issue the command, things like that. But our next step, we need to add that in-game feedback, because just having this debug console print out which one we have selected, not too great. The document will have you create a disk and have you add that to each one of the agents and create a prefab and stuff. We're going to do something similar, but rather than being a disk, I'll put a little kind of hat on their head or some sort of symbol above their head, just to be a little bit different. So for that, let's go ahead and get rid of this agent, and we'll be opening up this agent and basically making a prefab out of it so that we can interact with it a bit more. I'm going to right click, add a new object to it. We're going to add just a cube. And we'll call it selection highlight. We'll move the cube up, we'll rotate it a bit so that it's kind of like a diamond above the head. We'll scale it down. Let's see, 0.3. Might be a little small. And 0.3 is fine. As long as we can see it in game, it's all right to me. Oh, not 3E. All right. So we've got a selection highlight object. Now we need a way to interact with this object. This new selection highlight object has no script on it. So we're going to need a way for our parent object is actually running the agent script. So whenever we're getting an agent, we're actually getting this component right here. That's exactly what this nav agent sub current index is giving us. It's actually giving us direct access to this component. If I wanted to get a child component or an object on the child, like I want to get access to this mesh renderer so I can change the color of what material it's using. That's the goal here. So what I'll do is go into our agent script, and there's a few different ways you can set this up. I believe the document itself suggests using a serialized field with a game object. So we'll say game object, highlight geo for game object, and we'll just call this null at first. So we've serialized this field. In the editor, we would then now be able to select any game object from the scene. We could select our selection highlight. And then we have a reference to use that somewhere in our script. So let's go ahead and do that. And then let's take a look at another way this can be done without having to assign it in the editor and things like that. So we've got a reference. We need, similar to these helper functions right here, like the find destination, set main color. Let's go, and even the pause, which is how our agent manager is communicating. It's just calling the pause, which toggles whatever whether it's paused or not, and continues on. We'll be setting up something very similar to this paused functionality, where we'll need a bool to track whether it is selected. So we'll go selected or highlighted, whatever you want to refer to it as. We'll say is selected, start that as false, just like how the game starts. None of them are selected by default. And then we'll create a function, just like our pause function, to toggle whether it is paused or not, or whether it is selected or not, rather. So we'll create a public function so it can be called by our agent manager, which is outside this class. We don't need any return, so we'll void that out. And we'll give it a name. We'll call it even toggle highlight. I know I'm switching now back and forth between selected and highlight, but please keep in mind that that is just, they're representative of the same thing. So just like our pause, we'll toggle our bool. So we'll say is selected equals whatever the opposite of is selected is. And if it is selected, we will run code to change color for selection. And otherwise, or else, here we'll put some code for resetting back to normal. Reset back to unselected. All right. So let's take a look at the code we would need to set up for our selection. As I mentioned, and what we already set up, we've set up this reference to the other game object for our selection highlight. I want to use that reference and change that object's color. So for that, we have our variable called highlight geo. And we can get any component from that object. And we'll look for our renderer mesh or renderer. And we'll get the material, get the color, and we'll set that equal to color when it's selected. Let's go cyan. Why not? And then when it's not selected, we'll be doing basically the same thing, making sure that I am telling it to go to the highlight game object and not just using get component. If I just use get component, we're currently in a component of agent. It'll ask, well, what is this script attached to? Agent script is attached to our nav agent object. So if I do get component anywhere in here without specifying another game object first, it would just return this component and change the actual like main capsule color. So that's where that reference, we're actually channeling it through to another game object reference that we have set. And before I forget, when we are resetting back to unselected, we'll just reset back to white, I believe is the default color. So we'll save this. And we have our toggle highlight function now. If we go to Agent Manager, anytime we'd actually change our current selected is the only time we'd really need to react to telling it to turn on or turn off and things like that. When we start the game, right here is where we're changing to the new index. We're even printing out which one we now currently have selected. So just before we even print this out, let's tell the one we've just selected, nav agents, cur index, to toggle its highlight. So it'll turn itself on. This turns on newly selected agent. Save that. And we can give this a test now. We just have the one agent right now. I got rid of the other one that I had in the scene so that I can create a prefab of this guy. And we'll just put it in the nav agent folder, or nav agents folder, and we've got a prefab. We can now lay this prefab around, but as an even easier option, I'll just duplicate this guy. Control D for duplicate in this engine. A few times, we should have 3 now agents. Don't want to play yet. Because anytime we change the agents we have in a level, we got to make sure we update our manager to know about the different agents. I mean, right now I deleted the second one that was in level, so that's empty. Let's add our other agents. We now have 3 agents and 3 agents in our manager. We press right. This one is blue, so we have that one selected. Let's try and press space. We are interacting with it. We press right again. In game, both of these characters are showing blue on their selection highlights. If I try and press space, only this one is actively selected. That was the first one we selected. I press right one more time, all of them showing up selected. One thing we did, we called toggle when we wanted to turn on the newly selected agent, but nothing was ever toggling the old agent off. So what we want to do is make sure that the old agent also gets told to turn their highlight off. It's going to be this exact same line of code, but before we're actually changing which index we're currently on. This turns old one off. Then we change the index. We do the quick bounds check to make sure that we have a valid new one, and then turn the new one on. So it does require 2 toggles, one turning the current one off, changing the next, moving our selection over to the next one, actually turning that one on. All right, so now press our right button and something is broken. I screwed something up. Index out of range. Oh yes, I realize what I did now. I have this running saying turn the old one off, but the very first time we run this, it's not going to be a valid index. So we only want this to run, just like the protection I added down here, only run if it is current, if the valid index is good. So that it only turns off the old one when it already has one selected. All right. And now should be good to go. Press right, we select that first one. I'm going to just pause, cycle, pause, And we can now cycle through. We only have one selected at a time. Let's say I want that one back moving. There we go. We've now got it all synced up. And that's pretty much the entire assignment there complete. But let's take a look at how we could set up a couple of different things, or rather a couple of things differently. Rather than leaving it up to our agent and using a serialized field here to select what our highlight object is, let's go ahead and get rid of that. And rather than being a full-on, well, I guess we will store the game object. That's not too bad. But let's make this private, and then inside our start function, which I don't believe this one has yet. Nope, does not have a start. Override start. Let the base stuff run so the state machine still initializes everything correctly. We can ask for our highlight game object from our code. Since we know our agent is attached, or since we know our highlight game object is actually the child of our agent, or whatever the object this is attached to, we can ask the game object to get a component in one of its children. And that could give us something nice, but straight from the game object, there's the transform. And the transform is what holds the parent and child hierarchy. We can even see what its parent is and things like that. Or we can go straight down to get child, things like that. Get child requires an integer index. I know there's only one child on this object, so we'll get index 0. That'll be the very first child. And from there, this is returning an actual transform, but we can get the game object that transform is associated with. And that gives us our highlight game object. We save that. We'll see in game. There won't be any difference in game. Highlights are all still working. The only main difference is that it's cleaned up now on each agent rather than having a chance to misassign which selection highlight it should go to. It's now automatically assigned from code. It'll just use whatever child you've attached here. All right, that pretty much wraps it up for today. Were there any questions about anything we went over? You guys have been pretty quiet this whole time, so. Yes, this will be uploaded as soon as I finish up with lecture. All right, well then I'll leave you to it. That was pretty much it for today. On next class, we'll actually be talking about Project Sneaky Sneaky a bit, taking a look at how you can set up your player character and things like that, and just going over all the expected responsibilities for it. I do recommend taking a peek at Sneaky Sneaky if you do finish up this assignment pretty quickly. And Ray, I'll get back to you in a moment for that. But yeah, like nav agents and a manager, we pretty much just went through the whole thing in this lecture, as well as it's all referenced in the assignment documents. All right. So one thing I do want to leave you with is try and check out the Sneaky Sneaky project, so that if you had any questions about what the instructions and things are asking, try and take a look over that before next class, so we can try and cover that in some of the lectures for it. Alrighty. Have a good one, everyone.